General Hospital will reveal the couples who will break up on Valentine's Day at GH, causing regret for viewers. Brook Lynn. Quartermain and Harrison Chase are toast. Brook Lynn had always been good at keeping secrets, but this time, the weight of her past had become too much for Chase to ignore. Their once picture-perfect romance, filled with stolen kisses and impromptu serenades, had started to unravel the moment the truth surfaced. Chase had been willing to overlook many things, but discovering that Brook Lynn had withheld such a crucial part of her past, one that directly impacted their future, was more than he could bear. The pain of knowing he could never give her the one thing she secretly longed for, while someone else already had, gnawed at him relentlessly. Brook Lynn tried to reason with him, insisting that she had never meant to deceive him, but the damage had already been done. Chase couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. He had envisioned a life with her, filled with love, trust, and a family of their own, but now, that dream felt like a cruel joke. The silence between them, once comfortable and intimate, had turned cold and unbearable. Valentine's Day was supposed to be a time of love and renewal, but for Brook Lynn and Chase, it had become a day of reckoning. No grand gesture or heartfelt apology could fix what was broken. As the reality of their situation settled in, Chase realized that love alone wasn't enough to mend the cracks that had formed. And as Brook Lynn stood before him, her eyes pleading for a second chance, he knew deep down that some things simply couldn't be undone. Jack Brennan and Carly Spencer fizzle fast. Carly had always been drawn to men who carried an air of danger, but something about Jack made her tread cautiously, even as she found herself sinking deeper into his world. Their whirlwind romance had ignited like a spark, but it had yet to burn steadily like a lasting flame. At first, she told herself it was just part of his charm, that mysterious allure, the thrilling unpredictability that made him different from the men she had loved before. But as time went on, she began to wonder if she had mistaken secrecy for excitement. Jack was an enigma, a man who knew how to say just enough to keep her hooked while keeping the rest of his life locked away in shadows. His work with the WSB was supposedly behind him, but Carly wasn't naive enough to believe that an organization like that ever truly let go of its people. There were too many unexplained absences, too many hushed phone calls that ended the moment she walked into the room. She had seen this kind of thing before, lived through it with men who thought they could have it all, love, danger, and a life divided between the truth and lies. It never ended well. She had ignored the warning signs for weeks, convincing herself that she could handle it. After all, Carly Spencer was no damsel in distress. She was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had rebuilt her life time and time again. If Jack thought he could keep her on the sidelines while he played his spy games, he had another thing coming. But the more she tried to get answers, the more she felt like she was chasing shadows. Jack wasn't just secretive, he was impenetrable, as if he had learned long ago that opening up was a risk he could never afford to take. Valentine's Day was fast approaching, and Carly found herself at a crossroads. They had planned a night together, nothing extravagant, just a quiet evening at her place, a chance to escape the outside world for a few hours. But when the day arrived, Jack was nowhere to be found. No calls, no messages, nothing but radio silence. Carly sat in her living room, staring at the untouched dinner she had ordered, a sinking feeling settling in her gut. This wasn't just about Valentine's Day, it was about everything leading up to this moment. Hours passed before she finally heard the familiar knock at her door. When she opened it, there he was, looking as effortlessly charming as ever, his eyes filled with that same intensity that had drawn her in from the start. But something was different this time. Carly didn't rush to embrace him, didn't demand an explanation. She simply stood there, arms crossed, waiting for him to speak. "I got caught up," he finally said, the words empty even as they left his lips. Caught up. That was all she got. No apology, no attempt to reassure her, just a flimsy excuse that barely scratched the surface of the truth. Carly felt the weight of reality pressing down on her, a realization settling in with crushing finality: this was who Jack was. He wasn't going to change, wasn't going to suddenly decide that she deserved more than half-truths and late-night disappearances. She took a slow breath, nodding to herself. "You know what? I don't need this," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Jack looked at her, a flicker of something, regret, maybe, crossing his face, but he said nothing. He wasn't going to fight for this, and deep down, she had always known he wouldn't. Carly wasn't about to spend another second waiting for a man to decide whether or not she was worth the effort. As she shut the door behind him, she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. This wasn't heartbreak, it was freedom. Jack Brennan could keep his secrets, his danger, and whatever life he was running from. Carly Spencer had her own future to think about, and for once, she wasn't looking back. Willow Tate and Drew Kane are in for a crash landing. Willow had spent the last year fighting for her life, and now that she had finally come out on the other side of her health crisis, she was ready to focus on the future, one that was supposed to be filled with stability, love, and the kind of peace she had been craving for so long. Drew had been there for her, supporting her through some of her darkest days, and in many ways, she had come to see him as her rock. But in Port Charles, love was never as simple as it seemed. Drew had his own battles to fight, and his political ambitions had taken him down a path that left little room for transparency. Willow had been so caught up in her recovery that she hadn't questioned the long nights, the phone calls he quickly silenced, or the way his gaze sometimes flickered with hesitation when she asked about his past. She had assumed it was stress from the election, from the pressure of stepping into a public role he had never fully anticipated. What she hadn't realized was that Drew wasn't just carrying the weight of his political career, he was carrying a secret that had the power to destroy everything they had built. The truth about Drew and Nina had been buried for months, but secrets had a way of surfacing at the worst possible times. Maybe it would come out in a heated argument, slipping from the lips of someone who knew too much. Maybe Nina, in a desperate attempt to repair her fractured relationship with Willow, would decide that honesty was the only way forward. Or maybe it would be Carly, unable to keep quiet any longer, who would drop the bombshell that changed everything. However it happened, one thing was certain: when Willow found out, there would be no coming back from it. She had already spent so much of her life feeling betrayed, by her mother, by those who claimed to have her best interests at heart but only ended up hurting her in the end. Drew had been different, or at least, she had believed he was. But knowing he had been with Nina, that he had kept it from her even as he comforted her through her mother's countless deceptions, would be a blow she couldn't forgive. Drew had always prided himself on being the man who did the right thing, but this time, he had failed. And as the walls of his carefully constructed life began to crumble around him, he would have to face the consequences of his choices. Willow had fought too hard to reclaim her life. She wasn't about to spend another moment with someone who had lied to her so easily. By the time Valentine's Day arrived, what should have been a celebration of love and renewal had turned into something much colder. Drew had lost her trust, and in Port Charles, that was something that could never be rebuilt once it was broken. Willow wasn't the same woman she had been a year ago. She was stronger, more resolute, and unwilling to settle for anything less than the truth. And as she walked away from the man she had once believed in, she knew one thing for certain: some love stories simply weren't meant to last.